Mae'n ddiwrnod niwlog. Diwrnod ble mae'r glaw yn hongian yn yr awyr. And on this misty, damp day, you're walking along a quiet road that cuts between two mountains. And that's when you see them, ahead of you on the road. A band of 7 men, 7 soldiers. Maen nhw'n cerdded yn araf. They walk as if they are carrying the memories of the battle that they have fought on their shoulders. Ond wrth iddyn nhw agosau, rydych chi'n sylweddoli rhywbeth. They're carrying something else on their shoulders too. A head. A huge head. The head of a giant cut off at the neck. Ac efallai rydych chi'n cymryd cam yn ôl. But then you see something else. The mouth of the head is open. Mae'r llygaid ar agor. Mae'r pen yn siarad. The head is talking to the men as they carry it along that misty road. Who are these men? Pwy yw'r dynion ma? I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you the story of the assembly of the head. Gwledd a pen. Those 7 men were the only men to return from a great war fought here in Ireland, where I'm telling you the story from. That war was fought between the men of Ynys y Cedyrn, the island of the mighty, as Britain was once known, and the men of Ireland. Rhyfel ofnadwy oedd hi, rhyfel a ddinistrwyd, y tir I gyd. And at the end of that great war, just as the final trumpet was being sounded, a spear, poisoned at the tip, came flying through the air, a glanio yng nghoes Bendigeidfran, landing in the leg of Bendigeidfran, the king of Ynys y Cedyrn, the king of the island of the mighty. Bendigeidfran, a giant. So tall he was that he was the size of 3 great trees, put one on top of the other. Bendigeidfran looked down at his leg ac oedd e'n gwybod oedd e'n mynd I farw. He fell to the ground and his brother, Manawydan, came running to his side. Be fedrai wneud? Sut fedrai reoli hebddo ti? Toraf ym mhen I ffwrdd. Cut off my head, said Bendigeidfran the giant. Take it back with you across the sea to Ynys y Cedyrn and bury it there. Dyna be wnaeth Manawydan. Codi ei gleddyf I fyny yn yr awyr, dod â fe lawr. But as he lifted his brother's huge giant head into his arms, something amazing happened. Y ceg yn agor, y llygaid yn agor, the head was still alive. It began to talk to him, and Manawydan felt his heart lightening at the thought he would not be without his brother. And so Manawydan brought his brother's head back to the island of Britain, back to Ynys y Cedyrn, and with him came the remaining 6 men. A dyma nhw nawr, y 7 dyn yn cerdded ar hyd y ffordd dawel yma rhwng y mynyddoedd. And that's where they were, walking that quiet road, carrying the head of their king, still talking on their shoulders, and carrying too the weight of the war that they had fought. And cario yn eu calonau nhw cri y dynion roedden nhw wedi ymladd. Pob un ohonyn nhw yn cerdded yn araf deg, pob un ohonyn nhw gyda dristwch yn ei galon. Eventually, Manawydan turned to this band of soldiers, this ragtag, shambling band that he had with him, and he said, Digon yw digon. We have grieved enough. Let us go to Harlech, to the great castle by the sea. A dyna, ni mynd I wledda a ni mynd I dathlu a ni mynd I anghofio. There we will feast and we will celebrate and we will forget what we have seen. Ar faes y gad. And so that's what they did. The 7 men and the head of Bendigeidfran, they went to Harlech, looking out to the west towards Ireland. They went to the great hall of that castle and they feasted. And it was such a feast. Y math o wledd ble roeddech chi'n gallu gofyn am unrhyw fwyd o gwbl. Great roasted hanks of meat that dripped with juice, fresh fruits that had been stewed in sugar and syrup, and big loaves of white, fluffy bread. And, of course, the drink, flagon upon flagon of wine and mead and ale and beer. Mi oedd hi yn noson anhygoel. Ac wrth gwrs, dim jyst bwyta, ond hefyd gwrando ar gerddoriaeth, a chanu a dawnsio. Because what is a feast without some music, without some celebration? Ac wrth i'r haul fachlyd dros y môr, as the sun started to sink over the sea to the west, they all heard it at the same time, can arbennig. Fi wela yn ysgynno, fi wela lan i'r afon, fi wela lan i'r afon. Adar Rhiannon, the birds of Rhiannon. 3 magical birds that came and circled around the castle at Harlech and canu. Fi wela pentre Aberdâr, didlara, didlara. Fi wela pentre Aberdâr, lle gwrag ar fy nghalon. And with the music of the birds of Rhiannon ringing in their ears, the 7 soldiers and the head of Bendigeidfran, dyma nhw'n dechrau cysgu. They fell into a deep, sweet sleep. A dyma nhw'n cysgu yno am y tro gyntaf, y noson drwyddi. Normally, these men were woken in the middle of the night with nightmares of the war that they had fought, but on this night they slept sweetly, they slept deeply. But when the sun rose, Manawydan opened his eyes, and despite the feast of the night before, despite all the good food and the good company and the music from the birds, he still woke with a memory of the war that he had fought, heavy upon his shoulders. Edrychodd y amgylch ar ei ddynion, roedden nhw hefyd yn dyhuno, and he could see that each of his men, they had the same thought in their minds as they were waking. Och neidiodd, mae'n iawn. Nawn ni ddathlu heno hefyd. We will keep on feasting tonight and the next and the next and the next until we have forgotten what we have seen. A dyna be wnaethon nhw. Bob noson yn Harlech. Every night in that great castle by the sea, Manawydan, his 6 men, and the head of his brother Bendigeidfran feasted. They drank. They sang, they listened to beautiful music, they listened to the song of the birds of Rhiannon, and there beside the sea for 7 years, 7 mlynedd, dyma nhw'n gwledda. But at the end of 7 years, Manawydan turned to his men, and he could see that each was still as sorrowful as he had been at the beginning of the 7 years, that all that feasting and drinking and celebrating had done nothing to lift the worries from them, had done nothing to make them forget the horrors of the war that they had fought. Digon yw digon, medda Manawydan. Awn ni o'r lle yma. Let us leave this place. Let us journey on and find somewhere that we can be, that we can forget. Somewhere that we will lift our worries from our shoulders and we will take them off and we will never have to wear them again. Dyna be wnaethon nhw. Codon nhw pen anferthol Bendigeidfran ar eu hysgwyddau nhw, and with the great head still talking to them, telling them stories as they travelled, the 7 men travelled away from Harlech. A ble eithon nhw? Where did they go then, the assembly of the head? Dyma nhw'n teithio ymlaen, dydd ar ôl dydd. Footstep after weary footstep, they journeyed on and on and on, down, down towards the south, the west of Wales. And at some point, those men must have taken a step, un cam, achos dyma nhw'n croesi drosodd, o'n byd ni i'r byd arall. They took a step across the divide between our world and the other world. And they found themselves looking upon a perfect, silvery sea, lit with the light of a dawn sun. Fi wela Ynys Cynon, fi wela lan yr afon, fi wela lan yr afon. And there, out in the centre of that silvery, dawn-lit ocean, was an island, Gwledd. A dyma'r 7 dyn a'r pen yn dringo I fewn I gwch bach, and the little boat took them across the sea towards the island. And when they got to the island, the 7 men lifted the head of their king out of the boat, a dyma nhw'n teithio fyny tuag at gastell arbennig. And in that fine castle there was a great hall, with 3 doors. 2 of the doors were open, and the 3rd door, that looked out towards Aberhenfelen, towards the coast of Cornwall, was shut. They looked about that great hall, ac wrth iddyn nhw sefyll yno, dyma rhywbeth arbennig yn digwydd I bob un ohonyn nhw. They took a breath, their hearts were lightened, and they forgot everything. All the memory of the war that had haunted them left those 7 men. And the head of Bendigeidfran smiled at the 7 and said, Croeso I chi aros yma. You can stay here for as long as you want, but don't open that door that looks out towards the sea, for if you do, I will never speak again, and if you do, you will have to leave this place. Well, doedd dim un ohonyn nhw am agor y drws, because this place made them feel so different, so new. And that night, they feasted. Gwledd arall, gwledd anhygoel gyda'r canu a'r dawnsio, adrodd straeon, and Bendigeidfran's head told them story after story after story, and they feasted long into the night. And just as the sun was coming up, one of the men said, A ddylen ni agor y drws. Should we open the door? And of course, they all threw their heads back and laughed and cheers, iechyd da, and went on drinking. Ar bore wedyn, dyhuno nhw ac oedd eu calonau nhw'n ysgafn dal I fod. And the next day they feasted, and the next, and the next, and the next. Dyma'r dynion a'r pen yn gwledda yno, a'r gwales, am 10 blynedd, a feast for 10 years, and then for 20 years, and then after 25 years, the men on the island looked at each other and realised they had not aged. There was not a single new line upon a cheek or a silver hair in a head of hair. They looked exactly the same age. Dyma nhw'n mynd yn eu blaen nhw. They kept on feasting, kept on drinking, and every night they'd do the same thing. They'd look at the door and one of them would say, A ddylen ni agor y drws? Should we open the door? And then they'd laugh. Why would they open the door? It was so easy to keep the door shut. Noson ar ôl noson, blwyddyn ar ôl flwyddyn, gwledd ar ôl gwledd. And as time went past, Manawydan began to dream of the door. He began to think to himself, beth sydd heibio'r drws? What could be past the door that would mean that if I opened it, we would not be able to stay here. My brother's head would not continue to speak. What could possibly be beyond the door? But of course he pushed those thoughts away. He would not open the door. Ond noson ar ôl noson, ar ôl yr holl wledda, roedd e'n meddwl am y drws. The door that opened west towards Aberhenfelen, towards Cornwall. And among the men, the youngest was a lad called Heilyn. And Heilyn absolutely worshipped Manawydan, followed him everywhere. And he saw how Manawydan would walk sometimes as if in a daze towards that closed door. that his hand would sometimes just rest on the latch of the door, as if he was thinking about opening it, but he never did. And Heilin kept on thinking to himself, ddylen ni agor y drws. Should we open the door? 80 mlynedd, 80 years, had passed on the island of Gwledd. And the men, the assembly of the head, Gwledd y Pen, had feasted for every single one of them. There was not a new line upon a face. Each man was as young as he had been when he'd reached that island. But Manawydan looked about the men and he thought they seemed restless. They did not laugh with as much joy as they had before. It was as if they knew they had forgotten something, but could not quite put their fingers on what it was. Ac un noson dyma un ohonyn nhw'n dweud unwaith eto yn edrych ar y drws. Ddylen ni agor y drws. And the men round shifted nervously. And Heilin, the youngest of all, got up. He went to the door, he put his hand on the latch, he said, Siom arna I, os nid ydwyf yn agor y drws. And he pulled the latch back, and he opened the door. Fi wela yn ysgynno, fi wela lan yr afon, fi wela lan yr afon. A be ddaeth drwy'r drws na? What came through the door but memory, atgof. And each of the men swallowed all of the memories he had forgotten, the memories of pain, the memories of war, ond hefyd yr atgofion melys. They also remembered all the sweet things in life, love, friendship, the journeys that they'd been on. And some of them began to cry and some of them began to laugh. And Manawydan turned and looked at his brother's great head. And he saw the mouth stretch in a smile and he saw the eyes closed and he knew Bendigeidfran was finally at peace. A dyna oedd diwedd Gwledd y Pen. They could not stay there now, in the other world, not when they knew what this world had to hold for them. And so they journeyed back across the sea to our world. And they took Bendigeidfran's head to London, and they buried it at Gwynfryn. And they buried it with his face looking out to the sea. And maen nhw'n dweud, they say, that as long as that head remains there below the earth, Ynys y Cedyrn, the island of the mighty, will always be safe. And then the assembly of the head dispersed. Y dynion I gyd yn teithio I ffwrdd ac yn mynd ar eu ffordd nhw I fewn I fyd newydd. Each of them going on their own journeys, each of them experiencing all that life had to offer, the good and the bad, and not forgetting any of it. A beth am Manawydan? What of Manawydan? Well, he went on many, many adventures, and you can read about them if you want to. Many more after he had finished his 87 years of feasting. And when he was an old man, with lines deep in his cheeks and silver in his hair, os roeddech chi wedi gofyn iddo fe, if you'd said to him, ddylen ni agor y drws, Manawydan would always have said, of course, you should always open the door.